Helpful for life.
Oh, hello. So now you know a little background info on the different types of utensils and the different materials and things like that. I'm gonna run through some of the different ones that we think are important, and you may not be self-explanatory, but we'll have a downloadable PDF that has the full rundown. So let's get started. So first, we mentioned all the spatulas, right? But let me highlight two more that we haven't talked about. One, this is what's called an offset spatula, and that's because of this offset here. This guy is great for spreading. So whether it be butter on your toast or jam or frosting a cupcake or a cake, these guys are really good for that. This here is called a fish spatula or a turner, a slotted fish spatula to be clear. And it's a really good thing to have because one, this metal edge is really good for getting under the delicate fish without breaking it. And it's got a nice long and wide thing to scoop very well, very good. So it's really good for cooking fish, but if you have a good one, you can also use it to cook eggs and things like that as well. This here is a slotted spoon. Slotted spoons are good if you're serving something like green beans, for example, where they're cooked in a broth or some kind of flavored liquid, but you don't want to necessarily put all that liquid on someone's plate. Spoon rest. This guy can save you a lot of messes. This is where you just put it right next to your stove and you rest your spoons on it. Pretty straightforward, so it drips on that instead of on your counter. The basting brush, this is good for putting sauces on things. You want to get one that's silicone or some kind of heat resistant material, especially if you're going to use it on the grill. That way you can brush it and have this nice long handle so you don't have to burn yourself while you're doing it. Probably seen one of these, great for serving spaghetti or stringy pasta.
And here's a fun fact for you. You can actually use the circular hole in this to measure one serving of spaghetti.
Tongs, you want to make sure you get a kind with non-metal tips for if you're working on non-stick pans, and then you're going to need a metal one if you want to be cooking on anything really hot or on the grill. The ladles, you want a small one maybe if you're going to do some sauces or gravies or things like that, and a big one if you're doing a soup or stew or something along those lines. The whisk, likewise, metal, non-metal. Then when it comes to the knives, so if you can afford it or you enjoy using nice knives, things like that, a knife block is a great thing to have. But in reality, you can get pretty much everything done with just a good chef's knife and a good bread knife. So the bread knife has a serrated edge, which makes it really good for cutting things like bread, but you can also cut things like tomatoes and things that have a skin. It does a good job cutting through, sometimes better than the chef's knife. Another one, if you're gonna buy one more, is a paring knife, which is basically just a short knife, which is good for manipulating small things like fruits and peppers and things like that. So one thing that my parents actually got rid of that I'm very ashamed of them for getting rid of is what's called a honing rod. And a honing rod is basically a long pole that could be metal or ceramic or something like that. And what you do is you use that you may have seen chefs do it on a TV show. You run the blade on either side of it. And what it does is whenever the knife blade, it's supposed to look like this, like a nice triangle. Well, sometimes it'll bend over on one side, or maybe it'll get some chips. The honing blade helps keep that triangle, we'll call it, that edge, it helps keep it in that triangle. And so if it starts leaning to one side, that honing blade helps correct it. A general good practice is to hone your knives every time you use them, and that will help them last a lot longer and stay sharp for longer. One thing they do have, however, is a knife sharpener. And so this is one type that you'll see, I forget the official term, but let's just call it a pull-through knife sharpener. And there's two kinds here. There's the coarse and the fine. And if you look closely, you can see that they're different materials. But what you do first is you run through once on the coarse side, you kind of pull it through a few times, and you would do this with it down on the counter. And then you'd go through the fine side to kind of get that extra polish on there and to get it extra sharp. Now the pull through is the kind that most people will probably want to use because it's very easy to use. But if you want to get hardcore, you can get what's called a whetstone. And that's where you have literally a stone that you're grinding the knife off of. It's kind of fun, but it's a little more difficult to do. Another thing they don't have or got rid of is kitchen shears. My wife and I use kitchen shears all the time, whether it's for cutting quesadillas or pizza or just opening up meat packages, things like that. Kitchen shears are nice because they have a little bit thicker, heavier duty blade. And so they're really good for cutting through certain types of food that may not be great to cut with regular scissors. So that's why they've got here, they just have the regular scissors. They do have 17 pairs of these though. One other kind of scissors that's just kind of more of a, definitely an optional thing, but this is what's called herb scissors. And you can see there's actually 4 blades on either side. And so whenever you cut up the herbs, it does a great job of getting it into real small pieces for you. Okay, now let's talk about cutting boards. For the basic needs, you're gonna wanna have one small one, and then you're gonna wanna have one pretty big one. And you can obviously have many more than that, but those are the 2 basic points, the 2 basic ones you wanna make sure you have. Let's talk about the material of the cutting board though. So this one here is a wood cutting board. Now wood is actually better to have as a cutting board. People think it feels better when you cut on it. It dulls the blade a lot less, and they can last a lot longer. Once, you know, over time it's gonna wear down, but if you want to and you have a nice wood cutting board, you can actually sand it down and refinish it to where you can use it pretty much indefinitely. But the downside of wood is that it does get gashes in it over time that you may have to do a little work to repair, and you may need to oil it and things like that to keep it in tip-top shape. Also, you're not supposed to let these soak. You can't put them in the dishwasher, so they take a little more care. The plastic one, on the other hand, is what we generally recommend because you can use it however you want. It does also get some gashes in it. So after it gets gashes in it, there's no repairing it, unfortunately. So you just have to replace your cutting board probably every couple of years because those gashes can collect bacteria and things like that in there. But the nice thing about them is whenever you're done with it, toss it in the sink, toss it in the dishwasher, let it soak, do whatever you want. You don't have to worry as much about how to handle it and how to use it correctly. And bonus for a lot of you guys, it's cheaper. Nesting mixing bowls. So here's the kinds they have. Not the best ones, but the whole point of them nesting is so they can store well wherever they are in the cabinet. And you'll need some small ones, maybe just to beat an egg or something where you don't need that much. And then you'll need a big one where you're maybe making a cake or something more involved. Colander. This is a fancy way to say a strainer that's usually used to strain pasta. You can also do it to rinse off canned veggies or things like that. Just a couple of different varieties of that. Then you have a sieve, which is basically like a fine mesh strainer, which is good, for example, if you're making a soup or a broth or something like that, and you want to make sure you get out all the finer particles. Vegetable peeler, don't cheap out on these because it makes it a lot easier to use, and really it's difference of a couple dollars to get it a good one. This is a box grater. So there's different kinds of cheese graters, but the box grater is personally my least favorite. And that's because it's really hard to clean, especially this one. It gets small up at the top, and you can't really easily get a scrub brush in there or a sponge or anything that you want to wash with. So personally, I prefer there's a kind that's flat, and you just hold it on the counter at an angle, kind of like this, and then you would grate on top of it. That one's much easier to clean. But my personal favorite thing to grate with now that my mom's told me about it is this salad shooter. You just put the cheese in or whatever it is you want to grate on top, plug it in, and then boom, it puts it out automatically for you, and it's faster and easier to clean. Another type of grater is a microplane, and this is basically like a grater, but the holes are just really small. And you want to use this for things like grating nutmeg, zesting lemons, limes, and oranges. Things like that can really amp up the flavor in your dishes. Speaking of citrus, the good old citrus squeezer. Get an electric one if you use it a lot. Then we have a meat thermometer. So this is what's called an instant read thermometer. And so you stick this inside the meat or whatever it is you're trying to get the temperature of. If you're doing it for something like making caramel or something like that, there's what's called a candy thermometer, a little different. But this guy is good because you can know if you've cooked your meat enough, if it's safe, and you don't have to worry about being on the unsafe side. And if you're cooking steaks or something like that, you know you can do medium rare versus well done, although don't eat your steak well done. If you get one of these, make sure it says the temperatures on here for you to easily access so you can see. And this is another one that you don't really want to cheap out on, because you can be sitting there waiting for it to tell you and it could take forever. It could be vastly inaccurate, things like that. I've had a friend who cheaped out on one and ended up returning it. Then we've got a baster. If you haven't seen one of these before, basically you put it inside the liquid, you squeeze the bulb and you let go and it sucks the liquid up. This is most often used, probably in America at least, for basting the turkey over Thanksgiving. Anytime you want to take some liquid and put it on top of your meat or veggies or whatever it is you're doing, you need to have one of those. So that's a quick rundown of some of them. We'll follow up with the next batch since there's only so much we could fit on the counter.